Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle, and today we're going to be working on what I call a modern day basket case. Customer brought this in pieces and parts. It's a Jigmaster 500. They tell me they took it apart because they were having a problem with the gear sleeve. They reordered it, and in the time it took them to reorder the gear sleeve, they forgot how to put it back together again. So this kind of harps back to the messages I communicate on most of my videos. Those messages are to, first and foremost, go grab a real schematic that tells you what all the pieces and parts are in an exploded view. A real schematic is similar to this one, which I pulled off of the Penn Parts website. It's for the Jigmaster 500 and shows all the pieces and parts. And the second thing I tell you is, as you go through the assembly and disassembly and working on reels, take pictures along the way. Whether you use a digital camera, whether you use movie like I'm using here, or your cell phone, take pictures along the way so that you know the sequence that they came off and how to put them back together again. So I always find these, I'd like to say this is an exception to the rule, but it's not. I get these requests in from time to time, and I like to think it's an exception, but it's not. People do make mistakes and forget things, and then they bring them to me. And I encourage folks to work on their own reels. Go right ahead. I mean, I don't feel threatened that I'm going to lose business somehow, but I'm doing these videos kind of to show people how to do that. So why would I be opposed to that, right? So what I do kind of concern myself with is if they're trying to take shortcuts or work quickly, because that generally tends to lead to a disaster, which is what we have here. So what I'm doing now is I'm taking out all the pieces and parts, I'm laying them out. Hopefully we have them all. I was told that we have them all, as well as the bridge, the gear sleeve that they reordered. And we're going to just go through this and make sure that we have everything that we need. And I always get concerned, particularly with the small parts, because they can get trapped somewhere, and we may or may not have them all. So it's a fool's errand to go ahead and try and reassemble a reel if you don't have every piece that's needed. And right now I think I just maybe have one or two more. There you go. So let's lay these out, make sure that everything is here, and if it is, we can continue. Okay, so the first thing I like to do is make sure that I got the frame. So here's my frame, and they didn't touch the back side or the posts, which is nice. So let me put the handle into that. I use a parts tray so I know where all my pieces and parts are, and the spool is in fine condition. This is my gear side plate. Everything kind of looks right. A little dirty, maybe we'll go clean that up. We do have the free spool assembly was not taken apart. We have the eccentric, the spring, and the lever arm. They seem to be fine, and we'll just go ahead and clean that up. So what I did tell you along the way was, take the pictures. That's one of my hints. The other is wear a protective glove around your hand. Keep some of this junk off of it. And I like to wear it on both hands, but my working hand just doesn't seem to work well with the glove. So I do protect my non-working hand. Okay, side plate looks good. Let's go for the bridge assembly. We have the bridge assembly. It's complete. This is the one that broke, so let's just put that aside. But apparently this rounded out. I can see it's oval, and the handle was just spinning but not turning the assembly. I guess that happens over time with wear. These are not that durable. Here's the replacement assembly. And one of the things I'm noticing on here is that this is a more modern Jigmaster than this gear sleeve. This is meant for the older ones. It'll work, but it won't work with that star drag. It won't work with this one because there is a difference there. The difference is in the threading. Is the pin that goes with that. I'm just going to put that aside for a moment. So these are two different gear sleeves. They're the same, they will work, but this one has fine threading, this one has coarse threading, so we're going to have to replace the star drag nut for that. So they made an error when they were ordering there. Okay, so we have the bridge assembly. We need the anti-reverse dog. We have that. The spring is on the bridge assembly. We're okay there. Then on top of this gear sleeve would go next, and then we have the backing washer for the main gear. Your main gear, let's make sure we have the drag washers. So we have a drag washer, metal washer, drag washer, keyed or eared washer that always goes in the middle on these. Last drag washer, last metal, and then the collar washer that goes underneath the ferrule, and the ferrule which sits on top of that. So we have all of the pieces for the main gear assembly. So we're just going to go ahead and put them in here for a moment. Then we have to move up to the jack. We have the jack that sits on top of the eccentric. We have the two springs that ride underneath the yoke. We have the yoke. We have the spool gear. We have the four nuts that attach to the back of the bridge assembly here that holds it to the side plate. And then we have the handle nut. So we have all the pieces. As I mentioned, there is an ordering error here, so I'll have to dig out a replacement star drag for that rather than trying to go back and reorder the piece in the part. Okay, so let's go put this back together then. We're going to start by assembling the bridge. So the bridge accepts the gear sleeve. There's a hole in the gear sleeve that accepts the pin which we put in there. That pin rides in this channel so that the gear sleeve does not move in and out on that. So let's start with this then. We're going to start by putting a little bit of blue grease onto the post. I use a Penn precision reel grease for that. This happens to be a Penn reel, but you know, any real grease will do. It doesn't have to be Penn's. It should be used for a general lubrication. Okay, that's turning nicely. I think I put the pin in here. There we go. I have that little pin. It's always the small parts that seem to get away from you, which is why I kind of have trouble with people who bag things or box things or just kind of throw them up as basket cases, because it's usually the small piece and part you're going to lose. So that little pin just drops in there. You want to make sure that it's below the line of the sleeve so that we can get the rest of this on. And once we do that, we can put the anti-reverse dog on. That fits over the stud on the side. And now we have a operational anti-reverse. I'm just going to go put a little bit of real oil on this just to make sure that that operates smoothly. If you use grease there, sometimes the contaminants in the water and that can clog that anti-reverse operation, but in this case this is working just fine. We're going to go over and grab that gear stack now. I'm going to start by putting that backing washer on, and I noticed that I don't have that pin quite in all of the way. That's why I said it has to be below flush there. Sometimes just takes a little bit of an adjustment. There we go, we got that on. Now we're going to put the main gear on. Oh, it's still sticking out a little bit. I'm just going to tap that with a little non-marring hammer. There we go, now that's slipping on. Okay, for drag washers, these are dry, so I'm going to use a little bit of Cal's Universal Drag Grease. Put that onto the fabric drag washers, and I'm going to work it in with my gloved hand. Another reason why you can use the gloved hand. This is just to keep the drag washers flexible. The metal washers, I noticed as I was putting them back and forth, they're in good condition. So again, just a little bit on each side. Work it in with your gloved hand so that it spreads evenly across the washer. Now this is the eared washer. It's keyed. There's two holes opposite each other in the main gear to accept that. Make sure you get that in, otherwise your drag stack won't work properly. Here's your last of the fabric washers. Then you have your topping washer, and the collar washer for the ferrule is in here. And we can set that aside for a moment. Okay, back over to the drive side then. We're going to take the two springs that ride underneath the yoke and set those in the recesses. While we have this opened up, we're going to grab some blue grease and put some onto the bearing in the back, and a little bit onto the eccentric. And grab the spool gear as well. I'm sorry, the yoke. That's where the spool gear rides. Put a little bit on each side of that. And check the spool gear itself to make sure that all the teeth are okay with that. Run a little bit onto that gear. This will all make the reel work nice and smooth. Once we have that, we can go install. You want to make sure that the slot in the spool gear is facing out when you go ahead and do this, because that's what's going to grab into the notches of the spool itself to turn it. Then we're going to grab that jack. I'm going to flip this so that the stud is up on the eccentric, and then we can just go replace that. And then that's the way that works. Now we're all down to buttoning this thing up by putting in the screws on the bridge. To do that, you press down on the yoke and spool gear, seat it over that bearing, and because this has got the spool, the spring, the anti-reverse spring seated in here, you don't need to do anything short of laying this over and then just aligning it with the studs on the side of the case, which we have now. They're all seated. Two different springs. We have two different screws. We have a fully threaded screw and a partially threaded screw. The fully threaded screws go below. The partially threaded screws go above. That's because those springs that we put in there for the yoke ride on that, and you don't want to snag those up. And then we can grab a screwdriver and tighten those up. And I like to do an alternate pattern on setting these screws just to make sure that they go in evenly. And sometimes they're a little bit difficult to grasp. Turn it over, take a look. Oops, we lost the screw there, of course. There we go. Get that one done. Here's the top screw here. That one all tightened up. I think I just heard the other screw just hit below me. Let me just grab that. I have a plastic mat below me so it's easy to find pieces and parts that fall on the floor. If you're working at home and you have a shag rug, you're in trouble with these small pieces. But I generally try to keep everything in these boxes, these little parts trays, and keep them out of harm's way when going to reassemble. Okay, so we need this now, the ferrule, but then as I mentioned, this is not going to work because this is a thin, fine, but I have plenty of others. Let me just go grab one here. Alright, here's a 60. So I'm going to need the 60 star drag nut to do that. That's a little bit smaller than the one that comes with the Jigmaster, but again, I got a basket case here to begin with, or a sandwich bag case, I guess. And we're just going to make this thing work as opposed to getting the right ones reordered and everything. He's already gone to the expense of buying this one. There's no sense compromising that and having him go back to do that. Okay, so then we just grab the handle. We can put the handle on now, tighten down the drag nut. We already put the lubrication inside the gear sleeve. If we didn't, we could put a drop of oil in there. I'm going to go ahead and button up the handle with the handle screw. Grab our Penn reels wrench, tighten that up. Now this one's missing the set screw nut, which is probably why all of this stuff happened to begin with, where you round it out. I happen to have a set screw nut there, a set screw, but that's probably why the handle started to slip and run over the gear sleeve to begin with. So we're just going to put the right one back in here. And we have to line this up. There we go. We're in pretty good shape. You have to line up the indentations in that screw with the, or in that handle screw with the set screw, and then you can tighten it down with what we just did. We'll spin it to make sure it works. It is. And then we can load in the spool back into the frame, tighten up the side plate, spin it, and we have an operational reel. So lots to learn here, right? We learned how to put this back together. We learned how to use a schematic to make sure that you have all your pieces and parts. We learned that this is a blueprint that can tell you all of the steps that I just followed if you ran into trouble. We learned, more importantly, to take pictures along the way. And I guess one of the unsaid lessons here was, if you're unsure about the replacement parts that you're ordering, go ahead and ask. Especially if you're using penparts.com, which is now mysticparts.com. They have a very helpful staff, and they will tell you what piece belongs with your reel. So in this case, they ordered the older gear sleeve, not the newer one, and as a result, if they hadn't sent it to me to just get put back together again, they would have had to go back and order a new gear sleeve to match the star drag nut, or they would have had to order a new star drag nut to match the gear sleeve that they had. But at any rate, that's a lot to learn in a day, but that's why I'm doing this. I've been doing this for over 20 years now. I'm sharing my experiences on YouTube. If you like it, please indicate that. If you want to see more of these types of projects, please go ahead and subscribe, as I'm constantly posting the ones that come into my shop. So again, thank you. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle.